Hey guys, picture this. You stumble into a moonlit tomb, the air a dank mixture of incense and centuries-old sand, and a silent stone eye seems to stare back. Yeah, the ancient Egyptians weren't just building pyramids, they were perfecting the art of long-term haunting, and I promise you'll never look at a drywall crack the same way again. Before we dive into the secrets that held an empire together for 3 millennia, smash that like button if you love a good mystery, and drop a comment with the weirdest ancient myth you've heard, because we're about to time travel without a DeLorean. Dim the lights, grab a snack that's less papyrus-like and more popcorn-like, and let your imagination drift down the churning, papyrus-scented Nile, where workers sweat under the scorching sun, while gossiping about pharaohs like we gossip about reality TV. You'll feel the gritty texture of limestone under your fingertips, hear the guttural chant of a priest echoing like a low bass rumble in a subway station, and realize that the greatness we romanticize was often powered by bureaucracy that would make modern DMV lines look like a casual stroll. Ever wonder why we still can't figure out how they moved 2,000-ton stones? Trust me, the answer is somewhere between clever engineering, sheer madness, and a little divine ego. So stay tuned and let's unpack this sand-filled saga together. Dawn spills gold over the Nile, turning the water into a ribbon of liquid amber. The air smells of reeds and fresh mud, a perfume that makes even the most seasoned farmer grin. Khepri, a lanky scribe with ink-stained fingers, shuffles his clay tablet while the river croaks like a chorus of gossiping hippos. He pauses when a stray breeze lifts a crumbling scroll from a sand-tossed pile, its edges whispering secrets older than his grandma's gossip. The scroll flutters like a nervous butterfly, begging to be read before it turns to dust. Khepri rolls the papyrus onto his lap, and the faint scent of beetle-infested linen hits him like a bad joke at a funeral. The hieroglyphs dance in ink so black they could swallow a cat, spelling out rituals that sound like a reality TV show for gods. He squints, realizing the text mentions a forgotten ceremony where pharaohs bathe in lotus-scented oil while chanting the "I'm the boss" mantra. A shiver runs down his spine, part awe, part fear of the ancient bureaucratic paperwork. He tucks the scroll into his satchel, already hearing the papyrus muttering, "You've got to be kidding me, another quest." Nefertari, the temple's priestess, glides in wearing a necklace of scarab beads that clink like tiny cymbals. She laughs at Khepri's dramatic gasp, calling him the drama queen of Thebes, with a wink that could outshine a sunrise. Her eyes, sharp as a falcon's, scan the scroll and instantly recognize the forbidden rite of divine right unplugged. If the pharaoh thinks he's a god because he can command the Nile, he's missing the memo that the river has its own Wi-Fi, she jokes, then grows serious. Together they decide to chase the clues, because nothing says adventure like deciphering a centuries-old bureaucratic nightmare. The bustling market erupts with shouts of merchants hawking figs, copper bracelets, and the occasional genuine mummy hand sanitizer. The scent of spiced lentils mingles with the sour tang of river water, while stray cats parade like runway models in torn linens. Towering pyramids loom on the horizon, their shadows stretching like the arms of a tired giant reaching for a nap. Khepri and Nefertari dodge a donkey that sneezes a cloud of sand, an ironic reminder that even ancient Egypt had its bad hair days. Between stalls, they hear a street performer reciting the Book of the Dead in a rap beat that would make modern MCs jealous. With the papyrus tucked under Nefertari's robe, they slip toward the hidden chamber beneath the Great Sphinx, where rumors say the pharaoh's original birth certificate is stored. The stone door groans open, releasing a rush of cool, stale air that smells like ancient cheese left in a tomb. Inside, hieroglyphs glow faintly, casting eerie light on walls that seem to whisper, "We saw that coming." As they trace the symbols, the truth unfurls. The divine rite was less about sunlight and more about political savvy, a cosmic version of Game of Thrones with more sand. They emerge, sunrise now blazing, ready to share the scandalous secret that even the gods needed a good PR team. The sun hammered the Siwa oasis like a busted drum, turning the palm-fringed lagoon into a shimmering mirage that made Khepri squint and Nefertari laugh nervously. They rode a sand-caked mule, its hooves kicking up clouds of gritty dust that smelled of burnt incense and goat droppings. Their guide, Ankh, a wiry man with a scar shaped like a hieroglyphic question mark, pointed toward a crumbling well where ancient whispers seemed to linger. In the distance, a band of rival treasure hunters swaggered in, their camels decked out in gaudy scarves that would make a pop star blush. Khepri tightened his grip on the copper amulet, feeling the weight of destiny and a faint hint of sand-scented paranoia. The rivals, led by a slick-talking rogue named Bastet, who claimed to be the reincarnation of a cat goddess, challenged them to a race for the first clue hidden beneath the oasis's palm shadows. As the two parties scrambled, Khepri's eyes caught a slab of stone half buried in sand, its surface etched with hieroglyphs that glowed faintly in the afternoon heat. Nefertari brushed away centuries of grime, revealing a cryptic phrase about an ancient council of sages who stitched time with golden thread. The words sang to them like a forgotten ringtone, promising power but also a nasty case of déjà vu. With a grin, Khepri muttered, "Looks like we've got a real-life national treasure on our hands, minus the cheesy dance numbers." Just as they began to piece together the puzzle, Ankh vanished, poof, like a magician's rabbit, leaving only a single sandal and a half-eaten date behind. The silence that followed was louder than a desert storm, and the rival crew seized the moment to snatch the stone slab, their laughter echoing off the dunes. Nefertari's heart thudded like a war drum. She could taste the metallic tang of betrayal on her tongue. Khepri cursed the gods and his own clumsiness, tripping over a stray scorpion that hissed a warning louder than his own frustration. The oasis, once a serene oasis, now felt like a stage set for a melodramatic soap opera. Undeterred, the duo chased the clues deeper into the oasis's hidden chambers, where the air grew thick with the smell of mildew and ancient perfume, think mothballs mixed with lotus oil. They decoded a second set of hieroglyphs that spoke of the council's hidden ledger, guarded by the eyes of Horus, who never blinks. Nefertari joked that even Horus would need caffeine to stay awake through all that bureaucracy. Meanwhile, a sand-filled rat scurried across their boots, reminding them that even the desert has its own petty thieves. The tension rose like a sandstorm, but the humor kept their spirits from drying out like a forgotten mummy. At the heart of the secret cavern, they uncovered a stone altar covered in dust that glittered like sequins on a pop star's costume, and on it lay a tiny, perfectly preserved scroll, basically the Empire's version of a cheat sheet. As they unrolled it, the ancient council's voice seemed to whisper, "We warned you about the sand, but not about the drama," a line that would make even a Netflix writer nod in approval. Suddenly, the rival hunters burst in, tripping over each other like toddlers in a costume party, only to be chased out by a swarm of angry desert beetles. Khepri and Nefertari laughed, clutching the scroll as the oasis sang its wind-carried lullaby, promising that the secrets of the 3,000-year empire were finally within reach. And somewhere, far beyond the dunes, a modern tourist snapped a selfie, oblivious to the ancient drama that had just unfolded. The night air smelled of desert sand and stale incense as Amelia and Rashid huddled over the cracked papyrus, the last line of the cipher glowing like a neon sign in a tomb. The decoded clues pointed to a forgotten stairwell hidden behind a false limestone slab in the Great Pyramid's north face. With a grin that could rival Indiana Jones, they slipped through the narrow gap, feeling the stone's cold breath on their necks. Their torches flickered, casting jittery shadows that danced like ancient hieroglyphs come alive. Every step echoed like a drumbeat, reminding them that they were now guests in a 45-year-old celebrity's afterlife party. The passage yawned open, a serpentine tunnel lined with basalt that smelled of mildew and ancient dust, the kind of smell that makes you wonder if mummies have bad breath. Rashid's boot scraped a hidden pressure plate, and a cascade of sand-filled darts erupted, whistling past their ears with a hiss louder than a popcorn machine. They dove behind a crumbling column, hearts pounding like a bass line in a club, while the tunnel's walls seemed to pulse with a faint, phosphorescent glow. Amelia whispered a quick prayer to Bastet, and the duo rolled forward, dodging swinging stone blades that clanged like cymbals in a rock concert. By the time they cleared the gauntlet, sweat slicked their foreheads, and the air tasted of iron and ancient curses. At the tunnel's end, a towering silhouette materialized, a spectral guardian, draped in linen shrouds that fluttered despite the still air, eyes burning like twin torches of the underworld. Its voice resonated, a low rumble that sounded like a pharaoh's gossip on a bad day, demanding to know why mortals dared trespass. Amelia stepped forward, brandishing the amulet they'd recovered earlier, its jade glint flickering like a smartphone screen in a dark room. The ghostly figure hesitated, then raised a hand, and the temperature dropped to the point where their breath formed tiny, angry clouds. With a wry smile, Rashid offered the Guardian a joke about mummified CEOs, and the apparition let out a hollow chuckle before stepping aside, as if amused by the audacity of modern tourists. Beyond the Guardian lay a sealed chamber, its doorway blocked by a massive stone slab etched with a scene of the sun god Ra wrestling a serpent. Think of it as the ultimate Egyptian version of a Marvel showdown. The slab shifted with a grinding groan, releasing a puff of stale air that smelled like old cheese left in a tomb for millennia. Inside, golden light spilled from a pedestal, illuminating a scarab the size of a basketball, its wings encrusted with lapis lazuli that shimmered like a superhero's cape. The scarab pulsed with a low hum, sending vibrations through the floor that felt like a bass drop at a festival, promising untold power to whoever claimed it. Yet, etched into the stone floor beneath the insect was a warning in hieroglyphs. Only the willing shall wear the crown, the rest becomes sand. Amelia reached for the scarab, but a sudden cold grip clamped around her wrist, a phantom hand demanding a sacrifice, as if the pyramid itself wanted a ticket to the afterlife. Rashid's eyes widened. He whispered, "Do we really need to give up a toe for a trinket?" The chamber seemed to sigh, and the walls dripped a thin film of water that smelled like copper and regret. With a deep breath, Amelia pressed her palm to the scarab, feeling a surge of energy that made her vision flicker between the present and a sun-blasted horizon of ancient Egypt. The scarab's glow intensified, and the phantom hand vanished, leaving behind a faint, satisfied chuckle, as if the pyramid had just finished its Netflix binge and was finally content. The moment the jeweled scarab slipped from its stone cradle, the air in the temple cracked like a record needle on vinyl. A low, guttural moan rose from the walls, as if the very stones were coughing up ancient dust. Outside, the sky turned a bruised orange and the wind gathered, pulling sand into a furious vortex that roared toward Thebes like a giant sand-blown dragon. Merchants shouted, children clutched their mothers' skirts, and the scent of hot cumin mingled with the metallic tang of fear. In that instant, everyone knew the old curse was no myth. It was a full-blown sandstorm apocalypse on 4 wheels of destiny. Khepri, the scribe-turned-warrior, sprinted to the city gates with Nefertari, whose hair smelled of lotus oil and rebellion. They rallied the city's defenders, archers with quivers of reed-bent arrows, bakers wielding rolling pins, and a troupe of musicians who tried to drown the wind with drums that sounded like a broken heart. If the gods wanted a sand-filled theater, they'd have built it for us, Khepri muttered, half joking, half praying. Thebes streets echoed with clanging armor, shouted curses, and the occasional stray cat yowling at the sand that tried to swallow it whole. Even the city's resident cat mummy, a souvenir from a tourist's bad idea, seemed to stare judgmentally at the chaos. Amid the howling dunes, Nefertari unfurled a cracked papyrus that held the final prophecy, ink faded like a sun-bleached selfie. The verses whispered of a heart of gold hidden beneath the sun's last breath, which scholars later joked was just a poetic way of saying, "Look under the big statue." She squinted, deciphering hieroglyphs that resembled tiny emojis of scarabs and thunderbolts, and realized the key was a forgotten well beneath the palace. So the ancient Egyptians were basically early Indiana Jones, she laughed, though the sand kept trying to erase her grin. With each line they cracked, the storm seemed to sneer louder, as if the pharaoh's spirit was watching a reality TV showdown. The forgotten rite required 3 things: a handful of midnight figs, the blood of a willing sacrifice, and a chant louder than a market vendor shouting discounts on linen. Khepri sliced a fig, its sweet perfume battling the acrid sand, while Nefertari offered a drop of her own blood, tasting metallic and oddly like iron-rich tea. They chanted in unison, voices trembling like reeds in a flood, their words rising above the roar of the storm, echoing off the sandstone like a karaoke night in a pyramid. The sand momentarily paused, swirling into a glittering vortex that smelled of ancient incense and stale popcorn. Then, as the final syllable hung in the air, a soft, golden light seeped from the scarab's empty socket, bathing the courtyard in a glow that made everyone's eyes water like they'd just watched a tear-jerker movie. The pharaoh's spirit materialized, a towering silhouette of gold and sand, eyes blazing like the sun on a desert highway. He roared, a sound that rattled the very foundations of Thebes, demanding tribute and respect, while Khepri and Nefertari stood firm, clutching their makeshift weapons and a sense of stubborn optimism. "You can't scare us with a sandstorm," Khepri shouted, channeling his inner superhero. Think Hercules meets a meme lord. The spirit lunged, sand whipping like a giant's beard, but the duo's chant formed a protective barrier that crackled with the energy of 1,000 fireflies. With a final, earth-shaking sigh, the pharaoh dissolved into a cascade of glittering dust, and the storm subsided, leaving Thebes drenched, exhausted, and oddly grateful for the most dramatic cleanup crew in history. The moment the last chant faded, the scarab, gleaming like a polished beetle in a jeweler's window, slid back into its limestone cradle. A hush fell over the riverbanks as the Nile, usually as temperamental as a teenage influencer, settled into its ancient rhythm. Farmers felt the mud cool beneath their sandals, the scent of wet silt mixing with the sweet perfume of lotus blossoms. The curse, which had turned the waters sour and the crops to mush, evaporated like a bad meme after a week. Even the river's croaking frogs seemed to sigh in relief, their rivets now a gentle percussion to the sunrise. Khepri, once the palace's resident troublemaker, swapped his sand-splattered sandals for a reed pen and a stack of brittle scrolls. As royal archivist, he tucked the newly uncovered tablets into cedar boxes, sealing them with resin that smelled like burnt incense and fresh pine. He whispered jokes to the hieroglyphs, insisting that a bored god of scribes deserved a punchline about papyrus overload. Night after night, the flickering torchlight painted his shadow against the walls, a living hieroglyph dancing to the rhythm of ink drying. The court marveled as Khepri turned dusty mysteries into bedtime stories, proving that even ancient bureaucracy could have a sense of humor. Nefertari stepped onto the altar with the poise of a queen bee, her headdress glittering like a Hollywood red carpet gown. As high priestess, she swore an oath louder than a stadium chant to guard the empire's secrets, promising that no rogue tomb raider would steal the spooky scrolls of doom. She taught apprentices that the true power of a secret lies in the silence between the chants, a lesson she delivered while the incense smoke curled like a lazy dragon. The priests chuckled, noting that her new title sounded like a Marvel side kick, but Nefertari's eyes flashed with the seriousness of a cat eyeing a laser pointer. Under her watchful gaze, the sacred chambers hummed with the low thrum of chanting voices, each note a promise that the past would not be bulldozed by greed. Across the empire, market stalls burst with the clamor of barter, the smell of roasted chickpeas battling the tang of Nile mud. Children chased each other through the shadow of the great obelisk, their laughter echoing like a chorus of tiny lyres. The newly steady floods turned the fields into a patchwork quilt of emerald, and the scent of fresh grain made the air feel buttery and hopeful. Even the palace cooks sighed in relief as the granaries swelled, their cauldrons bubbling with stews that smelled of cumin, dates, and triumph. In the evenings, the sky blazed orange, and the populace gathered to watch the sun dip, feeling as if the gods themselves were giving a standing ovation. With the scarab safe, Khepri's scrolls secured, and Nefertari's vows echoing through stone halls, the empire stepped into a new era brighter than a pharaoh's gold mask. Travelers from distant lands whispered that the Nile now sang a lullaby rather than a warning siren, a tune that could lull even the most cynical bureaucrat. Future generations would inherit a legacy wrapped in papyrus, perfume, and the occasional joke about cursed beetles, proof that history can be both epic and oddly funny. As the moon rose, its silver light danced on the water, promising that the secrets of the past would be guarded like a password on a smartphone. Only the worthy could decode them. And so, the story closed not with a thud, but with a hopeful chuckle, as if the ancient world winked at us from across the millennia. The Nile swelled like a liquid sapphire, spilling its life, giving mud onto the reeds that whispered in the early dawn. Young Prince Khepri, barely tall enough to peer over the palace's low wall, felt the heat of the sun bake the sand into a crusty pancake beneath his sandals. His mother, the queen, draped a linen shawl over his shoulders and warned him that the crown was not a fashion accessory, but a heavy, pointy hat of destiny. The scent of fresh, baked flatbread mingled with the sour tang of river water, making Khepri's stomach rumble louder than a temple drum. He stepped into the royal courtyard, where the shadows of towering columns stretched like giant fingers ready to pull him into the game of power. Inside the palace, viziers swirled around like caffeinated beetles, each clutching scrolls thicker than a mummy's bandages. Priests muttered prayers over incense that smelled like burnt honey in desperation, while foreign envoys from distant lands fanned themselves with papyrus fans, their silks flashing like a Netflix opening credit sequence. Khepri watched a grizzled vizier whisper to a priest, their eyes flickering with the kind of conspiratorial sparkle you'd expect from a reality show backstage. The floorboards creaked under the weight of polished sandals, and the clatter of metal goblets echoed like a rock concert in a tomb. A stray cat darted past, scattering a bowl of figs, reminding everyone that even in grandeur, life could be as messy as a toddler's art project. That night, the court hosted a banquet that could rival any Hollywood feast. Golden platters piled high with roasted quail, figs dripping with honey, and wine that smelled like fermented grapes and ancient secrets. Khepri, seated beside the stern vizier, who resembled a pharaoh-era version of a stern gym coach, tried to hide his nervousness behind a grin that was more forced than a smile at a dentist's office. A jester cracked a joke about the pharaoh's new beard, likening it to a celebrity's questionable haircut, and the hall erupted in laughter that rattled the hieroglyphic walls. As the wine flowed, a drunk priest slurred, "The gods love a good drama, just ask the Netflix gods." The irony wasn't lost on Khepri, who realized that power in Egypt was as much about spectacle as it was about stone tablets. When the moon rose high, a hushed whisper slipped through the marble corridors, a plot to claim the divine right to rule, hidden behind a veil of sacred crocodile amulets. The chief priest, whose beard smelled faintly of sandalwood and old secrets, leaned close to Khepri and said, "The crown is a magnet for ambition, like a black hole. It sucks in everything, even your sanity." Khepri felt a cold sweat bead on his brow, as if the Nile itself had poured a chilly draft over his shoulders. He caught sight of a scarred vizier exchanging a sealed papyrus with a foreign envoy, the seal bearing a lion, an emblem of the rival kingdom, now sneaking into the heart of Egypt. The irony dripped like honey. The very people who swore allegiance to the pharaoh were already auditioning for the role of his usurper. By sunrise, the palace buzzed with the electric tension of a storm about to break, and Khepri stood on the balcony, watching the river glitter like 1,000 tiny mirrors. He could taste the metallic bite of anticipation in the air, mixed with the lingering perfume of lotus blossoms and the faint stink of dung from the nearby granaries. The court's intrigue had become a living tapestry, each thread a story of loyalty, betrayal, and the ever-present question of who truly owned the gods' favor. Khepri clenched his fists, feeling the weight of the crown's shadow already pressing on his young shoulders. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the dawn of the crown promised a drama that would echo through the ages. Think Game of Thrones meets The Mummy, but with more sand and fewer CGI dragons. Khepri slipped through the marble columns of the Temple of Hathor like a cat burglar in a museum heist movie, his sandals whispering on cool stone. He'd been summoned by a trembling scribe who handed him a scroll smelling of mildew and incense, its ink blotting like spilled wine. The parchment revealed a secret pact. The high priestess of Hathor, draped in gold thread, was trading grain and favors with the rival house of Senu, a clan whose name was whispered like a curse. Khepri's heart thudded. This was more scandalous than a royal Instagram feud, and just as dangerous. He tucked the scroll into his linen satchel, aware that the eyes of the gods might be watching from the painted walls. The next day he trekked to the forbidden sanctuary hidden beneath the oasis, where the air tasted of brine and rotting dates. Torches sputtered, casting jittery shadows that danced like nervous paparazzi on a red carpet. Inside, statues of Hathor glistened with sand, their eyes seeming to follow his every step, while the smell of incense mingled with the sour stink of bat guano, a perfume no priest would ever approve. Khepri pushed open a stone door that creaked louder than a squeaky throne, revealing a vaulted chamber filled with scrolls, jars of honey, and a map marked with a crimson X. He felt the weight of centuries pressing on his shoulders, as if the gods themselves were demanding a tip. As emerging from the cavern, Khepri joined a caravan winding its way across the cracked desert, its camels groaning like old engines and their breath a cloud of hot sand. The caravan leader, a wiry woman named Nefert, offered him dates that stuck to his teeth like sticky gum, while the wind carried the distant howl of starving wolves. Rumors of famine rippled through the dunes. Granaries were as empty as a politician's promises, and the Nubian kingdom's war drums beat louder each sunrise. Khepri watched the horizon, where the sun set like a giant orange eye, and wondered whether the secret pact would feed the starving or fuel the swords. He laughed bitterly, thinking that if the high priestess could pull a double cross, maybe the gods were just binge-watching a drama series called Game of Thrones. Nile Edition. Back in the capital, the palace buzzed with nervous whispers, the scent of spilled wine and sweat mixing in the banquet hall. Khepri slipped a note to the vizier, describing the pact with the blunt honesty of a stand-up comic. Your high priestess is trading grain like a shady farmer on eBay. The vizier's eyebrows shot up like startled hieroglyphs, and he ordered Khepri to confront the priestess before the famine turned the city into a ghost town. Khepri rehearsed his speech, feeling the irony of a low-ranking scribe wielding more power than a pharaoh's favorite cat. He imagined the priestess, draped in silk, trying to hide a grin as if she'd just been caught stealing the last slice of pizza. When Khepri finally stood before the high priestess in the moonlit courtyard, the air was thick with jasmine and the faint stench of goat dung from a nearby sacrifice. She smiled, a thin crescent that could have been carved from alabaster, and said, "You've uncovered my little side hustle, but the real danger lies in the desert, not in my pantry." As a sandstorm rolled in, whipping the palms into a frenzy, Khepri realized the true battle was not just against Nubia, but against the greed that gnawed at the kingdom's belly. He promised to expose the pact, yet his mind flickered to the oasis's hidden pool, where shadows whispered of ancient power. The chapter closed with the storm's howl echoing like a drum roll, leaving the audience wondering whether Khepri would become a hero or just another footnote in the sands of time. In the flickering torchlight of the royal archives, the scribe Nefri, who could copy a hieroglyph faster than a cat could chase a laser pointer, unrolled a papyrus that smelled of reeds and sweat. He traced the pharaoh's new military campaign with a reed pen, his eyes darting like a hawk spotting a mouse. The ink glistened, promising conquest of the Nubian frontier, but Nefri's loyalty was as thin as the papyrus itself. A whispered bribe from a rival kingdom slipped into his palm, a copper token shaped like a scarab, humming with danger. With a grin that would make a jester jealous, he folded the secret and slipped it into a courier's satchel. By dawn, the enemy chieftain unfurled the stolen scroll on a reed mat, his grin wider than the Nile during flood season. The plan's details, troop movements, supply routes, even the pharaoh's favorite sandal size, were now his to weaponize, and he laughed like a hyena at the impending chaos. Word spread faster than a gossip in a market bazaar, and the palace's bronze doors rattled with the first tremors of suspicion. The pharaoh, a man who usually ate figs in silence, suddenly ordered his guards to sniff out the leak, as if the scent of betrayal were a spilled perfume. Meanwhile, Nefri watched from the shadows, his heart thudding like a drum at a war feast. Inside the palace, brothers, Prince Amun, the hot-headed warlord, and Prince Seti, the scholarly poet, found themselves on opposite sides of a heated debate about the leaked plans. Amun's eyes flashed like polished obsidian, accusing Seti of collusion, while Seti countered with verses that dripped sarcasm, comparing Amun's temper to a sun-baked camel. Servants whispered in corridors, their breath fogging the stone as they muttered about treason, and the scent of incense mixed with the metallic tang of fear. The palace kitchens, usually alive with the sizzle of spiced lamb, now echoed with clattering plates as cooks hurried to hide their knives. Even the royal cats, usually aloof, prowled the marble like secret agents, ears twitching at every hushed word. Khepri, the commander of the king's elite guard, marched onto the courtyard with a legion of loyal soldiers, their shields clanking like a marching band of steel. He raised his voice, booming over the courtyard's stone echo, promising to purge the rot and protect the throne, his words as sharp as a falcon's talon. The troops responded with a roar that rattled the palace walls, the scent of sweat and leather filling the air, while distant drums of war beat like a restless heart. As he surveyed the scene, Khepri caught the faint murmur of rebellion slipping through the marble arches, whispers that sounded suspiciously like a bad karaoke rendition of "We Will Rock You." He tightened his grip on his spear, vowing to hunt the scribe down before the palace became a reality TV drama of betrayal. When Khepri finally cornered Nefri in the moonlit garden, the scribe tried to barter his way out with a joke about scribes being the original meme makers, but the guard's stare was as cold as a desert night. Khepri dragged the trembling scribe before the pharaoh, whose throne room smelled of incense and freshly cut papyrus, a strangely comforting mix. The pharaoh sighed, a sound that could have shifted pyramids, and sentenced Nefri to copy the Book of the Dead for eternity, a punishment as tedious as watching paint dry on a sand dune. As Nefri's reed pen scratched the cursed verses, the palace walls fell silent, the conspiracies evaporating like morning mist under the scorching sun. Somewhere in the shadows, a royal cat flicked its tail, perhaps pondering the irony that even in ancient Egypt, the pen truly was mightier than the sword. The sun hammered the waters where the Nile and the Aswan tributary kiss, turning the river into a molten mirror that reflected the dust-choked sky. Fishermen's reeds squealed like old violins as a sudden tide of armored footmen surged past, their sandals slapping the muddy banks with a rhythm that could wake the dead. The air smelled of hot sand, sweat, and a hint of incense, an offering gone wrong like burnt popcorn at a royal banquet. Khepri's banner, a scarlet scarab, fluttered like a rebellious flag at a rock concert, daring the usurpers to notice. Even the crocodiles seemed to pause, their eyes glinting with the same curiosity that sparked the upcoming showdown. Khepri rode forward on a chestnut warhorse that snorted clouds of river mud, its hooves pounding the ground like a drum solo in a stadium. Behind him, a ragtag legion of scribes turned soldiers brandished spears that glittered with the promise of redemption and a dash of desperation. The clatter of armor mixed with the distant croak of frogs, creating a soundtrack that felt oddly like a medieval metal band meeting a swampy jazz club. Khepri shouted commands that cut through the heat, his voice as sharp as a pharaoh's decree and as witty as a court jester's punchline. The usurpers, cloaked in dark linen, tried to look menacing, but their helmets kept slipping, revealing a surprising amount of bewildered eyebrows. At the river's bend, the high priestess emerged, draped in robes that swayed like a midnight curtain and studded with beads that clinked like tiny bells of doom. She wielded a ceremonial dagger that sang a high-pitched note when it sliced the air, challenging Khepri to a duel of wits and steel. "You think you can rewrite history," she hissed, her eyes flashing the same mischievous glint as a cat eyeing a laser pointer. Khepri replied with a grin, "Only if you promise not to summon a plague of locusts on my birthday party." Their swords clanged, each strike echoing like a pop culture reference, her blade a lightsaber, his a samurai katana, both trying to out-movie the other. The battle erupted into a chaotic ballet, mud splattering like paint on a canvas of war, while the river roared in approval, its waves crashing like an audience's applause. Arrows hissed overhead, some finding their marks and turning bodies into pin cushions, while others missed and landed in the water with a splash that sounded suspiciously like a failed karaoke note. Khepri ducked a thrust, felt the sting of a near miss on his cheek, and laughed, wiping blood with a finger that tasted like iron and river silt. The high priestess, unflappable, parried with a flick of her wrist, sending a stray spear spinning into a nearby reed, which snapped like a dry twig under a foot. The whole scene reeked of sweat, blood, and the unmistakable aroma of burnt incense, an olfactory reminder that even gods need to clean up after a party. When the final clang faded, Khepri stood over the fallen high priestess, her dagger clattering to the sand like a dropped microphone after a mic drop. He offered her a hand, half in respect, half in a cheeky, "You really should have taken a different career path, maybe pottery." She accepted, her eyes flashing a reluctant admiration that could melt the hardest stone. The usurpers fled, their banners snapping in the wind like broken dreams, while the river carried away the remnants of their ambition. Khepri claimed the throne, not with a crown of gold, but with a scarab amulet that pulsed like a modern smartwatch, reminding everyone that power is both ancient and oddly wearable. The crowd cheered, the reeds swayed, and somewhere downstream a fish sighed, perhaps wondering if history would ever get better at its plot twists. The dust of the last battle still clung to the riverbanks as Khepri stepped onto the throne of the living god. Rebels lay scattered like broken reeds, their banners torn and their war cries muffled by the sighing Nile. With a grin that could outshine a scarab's shine, Khepri raised his arms, and the crowd's roar rose like a chorus of hippos in mating season. He declared the age of chaos over, promising a harmony as sweet as honey-dripping figs. Even the palace cats, usually aloof, seemed to purr in approval, as if they sensed a new order of fish deliveries. First on his agenda was Nubia, the southern neighbor whose warriors could outrun a cheetah and whose gold glittered like a disco ball. Khepri sent envoys bearing jars of spiced beer and a cheeky note that read, "Let's be friends, not frenemies." The Nubian king, a towering figure with a laugh that rattled the palace columns, accepted, sealing the pact with a handshake that left a bruise the size of a palm on Khepri's forearm. Trade caravans rolled through the desert, their camels coughing up sand and gossip, while the scent of frankincense mingled with the sweet rot of dates. By sunset, the Nile's waters reflected not just the moon, but the twinkling promises of a united future. Inside the stone-clad temples, priests had been hoarding power like cats hoarding fish, until Khepri marched in with a scroll and a smirk. He announced a reform. The high priest would now answer to a council of scribes, artisans, and, for comic relief, the royal jester who could juggle scarabs. The altar's incense, once thick as a fog of mystery, now smelled faintly of burnt papyrus and the occasional whiff of sweaty sandalwood from overworked priests. Rumors spread that the chief priest tried to hide a golden ibis in his robes, only to be caught when the bird squawked louder than a market vendor. Khepri laughed, noting that divine authority was a lot like a Wi-Fi signal, great when shared, useless when hoarded. With political tides settled, Khepri turned his gaze to the horizon of stone, commissioning a pyramid that would outshine even the most flamboyant celebrity's Instagram post. Laborers hammered limestone blocks under the relentless sun, their muscles slick with sweat and the smell of cut stone mingling with the earthy perfume of goat droppings. Every night, torches flickered like fireflies, casting shadows that danced on the workers' faces, some of which looked as grim as a zombie apocalypse on a low-budget set. Inside the burial chamber, Khepri ordered secret chambers filled with riddles, hoping future pharaohs would need a PhD in hieroglyphics to find the royal sarcophagus. As the apex rose, the wind sang through the construction site, a chorus that reminded the overseer of a heavy metal riff, epic, noisy, and oddly uplifting. When the final capstone settled with a thud that echoed like a dropped microphone, the pyramid stood as a monument to power, politics, and a dash of theatrical flair. Travelers would later whisper that the stone's cool surface felt like the back of a dinosaur's neck, rough, ancient, and oddly comforting. Khepri's legacy, etched in hieroglyphs and in the uneasy grin of the Nubian king, survived wars, floods, and the occasional mummy's curse that smelled suspiciously of moldy cheese. Future generations would study his reign like a binge watch of a saga, noting the twists, the betrayals, and the occasional cameo by a mischievous cat. And so the mysteries of his power were sealed, waiting for curious minds to decode, much like trying to find the hidden Easter egg in a Marvel movie. The sun rose over the endless dunes like a molten gold coin, spilling heat onto the limestone outcrops where the new capital of Saqqara was sprouting. Young scribe Neferu squinted at the scrolls in his palm, the papyrus crackling like dry leaves in a desert wind. Beside him, seasoned priest Kem adjusted his linen headdress, the scent of incense mingling with the sour tang of goat milk from the nearby camp. A royal courier thundered in, bearing a seal that glinted with the pharaoh's cobra, summoning them to the king's grand vision. Even the camels seemed to snort in disbelief at the scale of the task ahead. Pharaoh Djoser's decree was clear: a pyramid, a stairway of stone that would lift his soul to the heavens like a cosmic elevator. The priest whispered that each block would carry a prayer, each angle a whisper to the gods, while Neferu scribbled the blueprint with ink darker than night. The desert air buzzed with the clatter of chisels, a rhythm that sounded oddly like a rock concert in the ancient world. Kem reminded the workers that the afterlife was not a vacation resort, but a rigorous bureaucracy, so the king's tomb needed to be flawless. The idea of marrying stone and spirit felt as impossible as convincing a cat to fetch a stick. Laborers hauled limestone slabs that sweated under the sun, their muscles glistening with a mixture of sweat and sand that smelled like burnt incense and stale urine. Every night the camp echoed with the groans of exhausted men, the distant howl of jackals, and the occasional lament of a donkey that had stepped on a stray scarab. Neferu watched a block slip, rolling like a massive, stubborn cheese wheel, and he muttered a prayer that the gods wouldn't mind a few extra cracks. Kem, ever the pragmatist, offered a joke about the king's afterlife being a DIY project for the divine contractor. Yet beneath the humor, both felt the weight of destiny pressing down like the very stones they were stacking. The overseers tried to keep morale high, handing out dates that tasted like sugary sun-baked candy, while the cooks burned flatbread, filling the air with a charcoal perfume that made the desert seem oddly homey. Neferu couldn't help but compare the construction to building a massive Lego set, except the pieces were heavier than a small car, and the instructions were written in hieroglyphics that looked like alien emojis. Kem laughed, noting that the pharaoh's eternal legacy sounded a lot like a modern celebrity's Instagram legacy, both aimed at staying relevant forever. Even the desert wind seemed to chuckle, scattering sand like confetti at a surprise party no one asked for. In that moment, the absurdity of their mission felt both humbling and hilariously epic. As the first tier of the pyramid rose against the horizon, its shadow stretched like a giant finger pointing toward the afterlife. Neferu felt a shiver run down his spine, half from the desert chill and half from the awe of watching stone become a promise. Kem placed a ceremonial offering of lotus blossoms at the base, their fragrance cutting through the dust like a fresh track on an ancient mixtape. The workers paused, their tools clinking, and for a heartbeat the whole site seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the gods to nod. With the sun setting in a blaze of crimson, the duo realized they were not just building a tomb, but laying the foundations of eternity itself. The sun beats down on the quarry, turning the limestone blocks into glowing white bricks that seem to rise like ancient skyscrapers. Laborers swing their copper chisels, the clang echoing across the dunes like a drum solo gone rogue. Sweat drips into their eyes, mixing with the gritty sand that bites like 1,000 tiny insects. In the shade of a makeshift tent, Kem lights incense and mutters the daily rites, his voice a thin thread weaving through the cacophony. The whole scene feels like a busted episode of a reality show where the contestants are cursed with curses instead of cash prizes. Every slab, Kem insists, carries a protective spell for the king's Ka, his life force, the invisible twin that needs guarding from the chaos beyond death. He paints each stone with a dab of ochre, whispering the names of gods like a DJ dropping beats at a temple rave. The workers watch, half amused, half skeptical, as the air fills with the sour scent of burnt myrrh and the metallic tang of blood from a stray cut. The belief is so concrete that even the dust seems to hum with a low, protective vibration, as if the stones themselves were tiny, stubborn guardians. It's ironic that the very rocks meant to keep the king immortal are hauled by men who can barely keep their own sandals on. Just as the crew lines up the next tier, the river swells, its waters swelling like a giant's belly after a feast. A seasonal flood rushes toward the site, dragging mud and reeds that slap against the unfinished walls with a wet, sucking sound. The ground trembles and the limestone foundations shiver, threatening to slip into the hungry mire. Kem pauses, incense smoke curling in the humid air, his eyes scanning the horizon as if awaiting a cue from a director. The workers stare at the rising tide, their faces a mix of awe and the kind of dread you get watching a horror movie you can't pause. Faith wavers like a flag in a sandstorm. Some laborers mutter that the gods must be on vacation, sipping nectar while the mortals do the heavy lifting. A grizzled mason cracks a joke about needing a divine warranty, earning a nervous laugh that turns into a cough of sand. The smell of wet earth mixes with the sour rot of rotting reeds, making the whole place feel like a giant, soggy pantry. Yet Kem, undeterred, steps forward, his robes fluttering like a superhero cape, and repeats the ancient chant with the confidence of someone who's read the script 1,000 times. The irony isn't lost on anyone. The very people who built the eternal tombs now question whether eternity includes a good insurance policy. Just as the flood threatens to swallow the base, a sudden gust of wind lifts the incense smoke, spiraling it into a perfect vortex that seems to seal the cracks in the stone. The water recedes with a sigh, leaving behind a slick, muddy carpet that glistens like spilled oil on a runway. Kem raises his arms, his voice booming louder than the river ever did, and the workers, half amazed and half exhausted, join in the chant, their voices cracking like old vinyl. The stones settle, each one humming faintly, as if confirming that the protective spells are indeed holding the king's ka safe. With a weary grin, a foreman mutters, "Well, that's one way to keep the afterlife on schedule, just add a splash of drama." Under the scorching noon sun, Neferu brushed aside a slab of limestone and felt a cold draft curl like a cat's tail around her fingers. The hidden passage yawned beneath the pyramid's heart, a narrow throat of sand-stained stone that smelled of ancient incense and stale rat droppings. Her torch sputtered, casting jittery shadows that danced like paparazzi flashbulbs on the walls. She heard the distant clang of a chisel, robbers already testing the fortress's patience. With a gasp that tasted of dust, she realized she had stumbled onto a secret older than the pharaoh's ego. Neferu sprinted back through the labyrinthine corridors, her sandals slapping against the cracked floor like a drum solo at a rock concert. Every echo seemed to shout, "Time's up," as the sun slipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in blood-red hues. She rallied the night watch, their eyes wide with the same frantic sparkle you see in gamers spotting a loot chest. Together they hauled massive stone blocks, their muscles straining like ancient Atlas figures, while the distant thud of pickaxes grew louder. The race to seal the burial chamber felt like a high-stakes heist, only the loot was a king's afterlife, not a bag of gold. Just as the last slab was poised, the high priest stepped forward, his linen robes rustling like old parchment. He warned, "A soul left unguarded roams forever, like a Wi-Fi signal that never finds a router." Neferu felt a shiver crawl up her spine, the weight of centuries pressing on her chest like a mummy's bandages. Doubt gnawed at her. Was she sealing a tomb or imprisoning a restless spirit destined to haunt the desert? The priest's eyes glinted, half amused, half terrified, as if he'd just read the spoiler for a cursed movie. Outside, the robbers' torches flickered like fireflies at a rave, their curses bouncing off the stone in a chorus of greed. Neferu could hear their guttural chants, half-remembered verses from the Book of the Dead, now twisted into a drunken anthem. She ordered the guards to brace the entrance, their shields clanking like a medieval metal band. The air grew thick with the smell of sweat, spilled wine, and the faint, sweet perfume of lotus blossoms, an odd juxtaposition of decadence and decay. In that moment, the pyramid felt less like a monument and more like a giant, stubborn refrigerator door that refused to stay shut. With a final, thunderous thud, the last stone settled, sealing the chamber as if the gods themselves had slammed a cosmic safe. Neferu leaned against the cold wall, feeling the vibrations of the hidden passage fade into a muffled hum, like the afterglow of a fireworks show. The priest whispered a blessing, his voice echoing like a distant sitcom laugh track, assuring the departed king would now rest, not wander like a lost Wi-Fi signal. Yet a faint, eerie sigh slipped through the cracks, reminding everyone that some doors, once opened, never truly close. As the night swallowed the desert, Neferu stared at the stars, half expecting the pharaoh to pop up and say, "Yo, thanks for the upgrade." When the first glimmer of Sirius clawed its way above the horizon, the desert night shivered with anticipation. The air smelled of sand, sweat, and the faint tang of river reeds, a perfume no modern spa could match. Torches flickered like nervous fireflies, casting jittery shadows on the limestone blocks that rose like a giant stairway to the gods. In the courtyard, priests in white linen whispered jokes about the pharaoh's hair, still a mystery to the hair care gods of the afterlife. All eyes turned upward, waiting for the sky to perform its ancient handshake with the stone. A chorus of low, guttural chants rose, each syllable a brick in the invisible ladder to eternity. Incense coils curled upward, spilling sweet, resinous smoke that tangled with the starlight and made the pyramid's apex look like a glittering crown. The high priest, balancing a golden scepter that could double as a selfie stick for the gods, aligned the pyramid's tip with the rising Sirius, a cosmic GPS reset. Drums thumped like a heart on a caffeine binge, rattling the dust from centuries-old cracks. Even the desert critters seemed to pause, as if they'd been hired as background extras for this celestial blockbuster. At the heart of the ceremony, a massive stone slab groaned as workers slid Pharaoh Djoser's sarcophagus down the stone chute, its polished black basalt gleaming like a midnight sports car. The lid creaked open, releasing a puff of stale mummy perfume that made a few onlookers wrinkle their noses in polite disgust. Torches sputtered, casting a wavering orange glow on the hieroglyphs that told stories of battles, love affairs, and the occasional royal diet plan. The crowd held their breath, the tension thick enough to cut with a ceremonial blade. A sudden gust of wind slammed the lid shut with a thud that sounded suspiciously like a cosmic game over. Now the pharaoh lay nestled among gold-leafed reeds, his eyes forever fixed on the heavens he'd never truly seen. The priests lifted their voices, pleading that Osiris, lord of the underworld and ultimate party planner, would welcome Djoser to the eternal banquet. A ripple of hope surged through the crowd, as palpable as the heat rising from the sand. Some whispered that the afterlife was just a really long vacation with unlimited bread. The collective prayer was a mix of reverence and a dash of sarcasm, like saying, "May your afterlife be as painless as a sandstorm in a perfume factory." Even the stars seemed to wink, as if the universe had a backstage pass to this drama. When the final chant faded, the pyramid's apex glittered in perfect sync with Sirius, a celestial selfie that would make even the most seasoned Instagram influencer jealous. The priests bowed, their robes rustling like ancient vinyl records, and muttered that the pharaoh's soul had now boarded the ultimate starship. No need for a boarding pass, just a good vibe. As the crowd dispersed, a few mischievous kids tried to sneak a peek at the sarcophagus, only to be shooed away with a warning that the afterlife doesn't have Wi-Fi, so don't bother texting the dead. The night air cooled, the incense settled like a dusty blanket, and the desert reclaimed its silence, waiting for the next cosmic drama. In the end, the ritual proved that ancient Egyptians knew how to throw a party that could rival any modern blockbuster, just with more sand and fewer popcorn kernels. As the sun sinks behind the dunes, the Great Pyramid casts a thin, jagged shadow that has outlived more pharaohs than Netflix has shows. Wind whistles through the limestone, rattling ancient sand like 1,000 tiny maracas. Centuries roll by, each one leaving a new layer of grit on the stone's weathered face, yet the silhouette remains stubbornly upright. Travelers from Roman legions to modern backpackers pause, squinting at the monument as if it might wink back. In that stubborn silhouette, the desert tells a story louder than any hieroglyphic tablet could ever shout. Beneath the pyramid's base, Neferu's tablets sit in a tomb that smells of mildew, beetle carcasses, and the sweet perfume of incense long since burned out. Their hieroglyphs glow faintly in torchlight, spelling out a covenant between stone and soul that even the sand respects. Scholars who dare to brush the dust off hear a faint murmur, like a ghostly librarian reminding you to return overdue books. The tablets survived floods, looters, and a particularly aggressive camel that tried to use the burial chamber as a restroom. Yet they persist, whispering that architecture is not just rock, but a promise etched in eternity. Ancient Egyptians believed the afterlife was a grand bureaucratic affair, complete with paperwork, judges, and a cosmic passport stamped by Osiris himself. The pyramid, with its precise angles, functions as a gigantic filing cabinet for the dead, each stone a folder holding prayers, offerings, and the occasional sarcastic comment about the heat. When the sun rose, its rays pierced the pyramid's apex like a spotlight on a stage, illuminating the path for the Ka, the life force, toward the stars. Neferu's tablets detail this journey with humor, noting that the dead might need a snack before boarding the celestial Nile cruise. In this way, the stone and the script team up, turning mortality into a well-planned road trip across the heavens. Fast forward to today, and tourists snap selfies with the pyramid, their phones buzzing louder than the desert's cicadas at night. A guide in a bright khaki shirt jokes that the pyramid is the original Everest for Instagram influencers, still a climb, but without the altitude sickness. Children press their noses to the cool stone, feeling the ancient sweat and sand that once clung to a pharaoh's sandals, while their parents mutter about cultural heritage like it's a new diet trend. Meanwhile, a scholar reads Neferu's tablets on a tablet, the modern kind, translating the ancient jokes into memes about when you die and your Wi-Fi still works. The humor bridges millennia, proving that even a stone giant can appreciate a good punchline about eternity. As night falls, the pyramid's silhouette darkens against a sky littered with stars that the ancient Egyptians once mapped onto their afterlife road signs. The wind carries a faint scent of lotus and decay, reminding listeners that life and death are forever tangled like a cat in a yarn ball. Neferu's tablets, now displayed in a climate-controlled museum, continue to murmur their covenant, urging each generation to respect the link between brick and belief. In the end, the pyramid stands not just as a tomb, but as a timeless billboard advertising the idea that architecture can outlive even the most stubborn Instagram trend. And so the sands keep shifting, but the legacy remains, etched in stone, whispered in tablets, and echoed in the hearts of anyone who dares to look up and wonder. The sun rose over Thebes like a golden spotlight, bathing the bustling market in a honeyed glare. Merchants shouted over piles of fragrant spices, the air thick with cumin and the occasional waft of goat cheese. At the heart of this chaos stood Queen Nefertari, a shrewd ruler whose smile could slice through intrigue as sharply as a papyrus cutter. She surveyed the crowd from her jeweled balcony, her mind already plotting the next treaty, while a street performer mimed a royal decree for extra laughs. Even the city's cats seemed to pause, ears twitching, as if they sensed the queen's power humming like a low-frequency drumbeat. Inside the towering limestone temple, High Priestess Merit tended the sacred flame, its amber glow flickering against walls etched with stories older than Netflix binge marathons. She whispered incantations that smelled of frankincense and wet sand, her voice resonating like a bass line in an ancient rock concert. As the temple's guardian, she balanced the weight of gods and gossip, deftly redirecting a jealous vizier's accusation with a wink and a well-timed, "May Ra bless your ego." The priests bowed, not just out of reverence, but also to avoid the dreaded curse of the cracked amulet, a superstitious slapstick that could ruin a day's worth of offerings. Outside, the Nile's breeze carried the faint clatter of chariot wheels, reminding Merit that even the divine had to keep up with mortal deadlines. Down by the river's mud-slick fields, Amara, a farmer's wife, wrestled with a sack of barley that smelled like damp earth and yesterday's rain. She scrubbed the clay pots until they sang a high-pitched squeal, the sound competing with the croaking of frogs auditioning for a swampy choir. Her hands, calloused from kneading dough and coaxing seedlings, moved with the precision of a seasoned gamer executing a perfect combo. When the midday sun baked the thatch roofs, she fanned the hearth with a palm leaf, the scent of burning papyrus mingling with the sweet perfume of blooming lotus. Even the village's stray dog, a mutt with a scar shaped like a tiny scarab, paused to sniff the stew bubbling over the fire, as if to approve Amara's culinary diplomacy. As the day waned, the three women's worlds collided in the palace courtyard, where whispers traveled faster than a gossip-laden pigeon. Nefertari invited Merit to discuss the upcoming festival of the flood, while Amara arrived bearing fresh figs, her basket swinging like a comedic prop in a slapstick routine. The queen raised an eyebrow at the notion of expanding female council, joking, "If we let every priestess run a department, we'll need a new title, Chief Goddess of Paperwork." Merit countered with a sly grin, better than a male official who can't tell a hieroglyph from a hierogamy. hierogamy equals marriage, a joke. The debate crackled like incense, igniting a simmering conflict over how far a woman's authority could stretch without toppling the patriarchal marble pillars. The sun dipped behind the western dunes, painting the sky in shades of copper and bruised purple, as the women's laughter echoed off stone columns. Their voices, rich with ambition and irony, stitched a tapestry where queens, priestesses, and common wives each held a thread of power. In the distance, a child shouted, "Mom, the gods are on tick-tock," a reminder that even ancient Egypt couldn't escape the urge to remix tradition. Yet beneath the humor, a serious undercurrent swirled like the Nile's eddies, promising that the upcoming debate would test the very foundations of this nascent matriarchal realm. And so, with a clatter of sandals and a chorus of croaking frogs, the stage was set for a story where women would not just echo, but roar across palace corridors, holy sanctuaries, and humble homes. The sun blazed over Thebes as Queen Nefertari slipped through the marble colonnade, her sandal-soft steps echoing against polished stone. Perfume of lotus incense curled around her like a silk veil, while the distant clang of blacksmiths hammered a rhythm into the air. She paused before the throne room doors, feeling the weight of a crown that glittered not just with gold, but with the eyes of a kingdom. Behind her, a troop of royal maidens whispered gossip, their laughter bubbling like a babbling brook. Nefertari smiled, knowing that today's banquet would be a chess match played with figs and swords. The first move came from Vizier Kaimwasit, a wiry man whose beard smelled of stale wine and ambition. He slithered forward, his tongue flicking out accusations that the queen had no right to command troops, as if she'd been born with a feathered headdress instead of a battle standard. The courtiers winced at his sharp words, the scent of sweat and incense mingling into a choking fog. Nefertari met his stare with a grin that cut like a papyrus knife, replying that even the Nile could not drown her resolve. A nervous chuckle rippled through the hall, the sound of a cat eyeing a mouse, until the queen raised her hand and silenced the room with a single, decisive clack of her scepter. Across the courtyard, the house of Montu, proud, iron-clad nobles with armor that clanged like a marching band, sent their champion, General Sobek, to challenge her authority. He boasted that only men could lead armies, invoking the gods as if they were Instagram influencers demanding likes. The courtyard's dusty floor kicked up a swirl of sand, tasting of iron and old blood, as murmurs rose like a low-grade protest. Nefertari stepped onto the sand, her sandals leaving imprinting patterns that resembled a map of conquered territories. She countered with a diplomatic offer, a joint expedition to the southern oasis, promising spoils that would make even the most greedy vizier drool like a cat at a fish market. The rival house hesitated, their confidence cracking like a cracked amphora, while the scent of roasted lamb drifted in, reminding everyone that politics could be seasoned with a good meal. Behind the throne, the queen's inner circle, her sister wife Merit, the high priestess Hatshepsut, and the witty scribe Ankh-Em-Hotep, conspired like a band of rogue superheroes. They drafted letters scented with cedar and honey, sealing them with the wax of a beetle, then dispatched them on swift barge to foreign lands. When the emissaries arrived, they found Nefertari waiting with a banquet of figs, figs that burst like tiny fireworks in their mouths. She spoke in the lilting dialect of the Nile, weaving promises of trade and marriage alliances that glittered brighter than the sun on the water. Even the most stoic foreign king cracked a smile, his beard twitching as if he just heard a joke about a pharaoh's pet crocodile. The queen's diplomatic dance turned the court's gossip into applause, the sound echoing like drums at a festival. By sunset, the palace buzzed with the electric thrill of a power shift, the air thick with incense, spilled wine, and the faint metallic tang of resolved tension. Male viziers muttered under their breath, their pride bruised like a bruised fig, while the queen's supporters toasted to a future where women could wield spears as easily as scepters. Nefertari's triumph was not just a personal victory, it was a crack in the ancient patriarchal stone, a reminder that even the gods could be outwitted by a clever mind. She raised her goblet, the liquid catching the flicker of torchlight, and declared that the kingdom would march forward, led by anyone who could command respect, whether they wore a beard or a braid. The crowd erupted, the clatter of plates and the roar of cheers mixing with the distant croak of frogs from the Nile's banks, a symphony of change. And somewhere in the shadows, a jealous vizier whispered, "Next time I'll bring a cat." The queen just smiled, already plotting her next move. High Priestess Merit stood at the threshold of the grand sanctuary, the sunrise spilling over limestone walls like molten honey. The conservative council of elder priests, their robes heavy with dust and the scent of stale incense, murmured that a woman could never truly mediate between the gods and the people. Their doubts drummed louder than the ceremonial sistrum, a rhythm that would have made even a tick-tock dancer cringe. Merit felt the weight of their scorn like a stone pressed against her heart, yet a spark of defiance flickered in her eyes. She swore she would prove her spiritual legitimacy, even if it meant dancing with Destiny herself. Council members sharpened their arguments the way a carpenter sharpens a chisel, each point a precise cut into Merit's reputation. They cited ancient myths where goddesses were hidden behind veils, implying that a mortal woman should stay in the shadows. Behind them, the air thickened with the earthy aroma of oil lamps and the occasional clatter of sandals on polished stone. One elder, with a beard that looked like a mummy's wrappings, joked that Merit's best tool would be a mirror, not a prayer. The irony was palpable. The very gods they revered were famed for their capricious moods, yet the priests clung to a static notion of gender. Undeterred, Merit turned to the sky for omens, reading the pattern of scarab beetles crossing the Nile as if they were Twitter notifications from the divine. She noted that the beetles formed a perfect circle, a sign of unity, and smelled the sweet, metallic tang of fresh papyrus ink in the breeze. With a swift motion, she traced the symbols onto a ceremonial slab, the chalk scratching like a record needle on a vinyl of eternity. The congregation gasped as a low thunder rolled, echoing the bass drop in a modern club anthem. Only this time, the gods were dropping their approval. Merit's interpretation sang of renewal, and even the most skeptical priest felt a shiver of awe. That night, beneath a moon as swollen as a pharaoh's ego, Merit led a daring rite that would have made the gods themselves raise an eyebrow. She slipped through shadowed corridors, the stone floors cool and damp, the scent of lotus blossoms mingling with the musk of damp earth. At midnight, she lifted a goblet of chilled barley beer, its frothy head spilling like foam from a surfboard, and poured it onto the altar while chanting verses that sounded like a rap battle between Ra and Osiris. The flame of the incense flared, throwing amber sparks onto the walls, and a chorus of crickets provided a percussion that rivaled any Hollywood score. When the ritual climaxed, the air pulsed with a sudden, electric scent of ozone, confirming that the gods had indeed heard her. Morning found the temple's female attendants gathered around Merit, their robes rustling like pages of an ancient comic book, each clutching a scented oil vial as if it were a superhero's gadget. Together they sang hymns that blended solemn reverence with the cheeky rhythm of a street busker's guitar, flooding the courtyards with a chorus that made the stone statues seem to sway. The council, humbled and a tad embarrassed, conceded that Merit's authority could not be dismissed like a footnote in a scroll. Their reluctant applause echoed through the columns, a sound as crunchy as stale crackers, but sweet with the promise of change. From that day onward, the temple earned a newfound respect, and the women whose voices had once been whispers now resonated like a blockbuster soundtrack across Egypt. The sun rose like a molten gold coin over Thebes, spilling its heat onto the crowded streets of the Opet festival. Queen Nefertari, resplendent in Lapi's blue linen, rode a chariot that squeaked on the sand-slick road, her crown catching the glare like a disco ball in a pharaoh-themed rave. Alongside her, Priestess Merit clutched a bundle of incense, its smoky tendrils curling through the market stalls where sandalwood mixed with the sour perfume of goat cheese. In the throng, Amara, a merchant's daughter with eyes as sharp as a hawk's, wove through pilgrims, her basket heavy with figs and the occasional stray beetle that squirmed in protest. The whole city buzzed like a beehive that had just discovered espresso, every heartbeat syncing to the drums of celebration. Suddenly, a clatter of armor echoed from the palace gates as a faction of disgruntled nobles stormed forward, their helmets dented, and their motives as murky as the Nile after a flood. They brandished spears like over dramatic tick-tock props, shouting down with the queen, while the crowd's cheers turned to a nervous hiss that smelled faintly of sweat and spilled beer. The nobles' banners, tattered and half-burnt, fluttered like bad hair days, and their leader, Lord Kefren, pointed a trembling finger at Nefertari, demanding she abdicate the throne. A stray cat, perhaps offended by the chaos, hurled itself onto the marble steps, scattering a cloud of dust that made everyone cough and momentarily forget who was plotting what. The tension crackled, and even the river's usual whisper seemed to scream, "Are you kidding me?" But Priestess Merit was not about to let the festival devolve into a reality show showdown. She raised her hands and poured the sacred oil of happy over the altar, the liquid glinting like liquid gold as it splashed onto the stone, releasing a scent that tasted of honey-roasted figs and ancient secrets. Chanting in a voice that could coax a stubborn camel into a dance, she invoked the goddess Mad, whose feather-light justice settled over the crowd like a cool breeze on a scorching day. The air trembled, and the rioters' anger fizzled into a collective sigh, as if someone had just hit the mute button on a noisy party. Even the stubborn cat, now calm, blinked lazily and sauntered away, as if to say, "Okay, I'm sold." While the nobles retreated, the ordinary women of Thebes stepped into the spotlight, brandishing woven banners stitched with lotus flowers and tiny scarab charms that jingled like mischievous iPhones. They marched forward, chanting hymns older than the pyramids, each verse rolling off their tongues like a well-timed rap verse, the rhythm shaking the ground and making the sand vibrate beneath barefoot feet. The scent of baked flatbread mingled with the earthy perfume of river mud, and some brave souls even splashed river water onto their skirts, creating a mud-splat fashion show that would have made any modern runway blush. Amira's voice rose above the rest, calling out, "For the queen, for the goddess, for our right to rule our own lives." And the crowd answered with a roar that sounded like a chorus of hip-hop beats and temple bells. The nobles, seeing the tide turn, fled like characters in a badly scripted drama, slipping on the same mud they had tried to use as a weapon. In the climactic moment, Queen Nefertari lifted her scepter, its tip flashing like a light saber of the ancient world, and declared that the power of Egypt would forever be shared with its women. The crowd erupted, fireworks exploding over the river, painting the night sky with colors that smelled faintly of cumin and triumph. From that night on, the Opit festival earned a new stanza in the bardic songs. When the priestess sang and the women marched, the kingdom learned that queens aren't just on thrones, they're in every heartbeat. History would later record the insurrection as the day the nobles got an unexpected plot twist, a reminder that even in antiquity, the script could be flipped faster than a Netflix binge. And somewhere far beyond the tombs, a cat curled up on a marble slab, purring in satisfaction that order had been restored, because, frankly, who wants to deal with a chaotic mess when you can nap? When the last trumpet of the battle faded, Queen Nefertari stepped onto the sun-baked dais, her sandals kicking up clouds of desert grit. The crowd's roar swelled like a storm-driven Nile, and the air smelled of burnt incense and sweaty optimism. With a sly grin, she brandished the royal seal, whispering a promise to keep the kingdom's coffers as full as a pharaoh's Instagram feed. The courtiers bowed, some wobbling like reeds in a flood, as she declared, "My reign will outlast even the pyramid's Wi-Fi signal." The sun caught the golden cuff of her robe, turning it into a literal spotlight for her newly secured throne. High Priestess Merit, whose chants could coax a scarab out of a stone slab, was led to a freshly hewn shrine that smelled of fresh-cut cedar and the faint musk of goat cheese offerings. Artisans hammered copper doors while sparrows fluttered overhead, their tiny claws ticking against the marble like a percussion section in a rock concert. When the veil lifted, Merit lifted her arms, and a ripple of incense curled through the aisle, making the onlookers' eyes water like they'd just watched a dramatic season finale. The priestess chuckled, noting that even the gods needed a good PR stunt, and the crowd cheered louder than a stadium after a winning goal. In that moment, devotion and drama married as tightly as a mummy's linen bandages. Meanwhile, Amara, the village scribe with a talent for spinning yarns, saw her tales of market stalls and midnight river swims become the latest folk anthem. Think Stairway to Heaven meets a camel caravan. Minstrels strummed lyres while the scent of spiced lentils and fermented date wine wafted through the tavern, urging feet to stomp in sync with the drumbeat. Children sang about her clever tricks, like how she once swapped a pharaoh's prized cat for a mischievous mouse and got away with it, an ancient version of a viral prank video. The chorus crescendoed, echoing off mud brick walls, turning ordinary gossip into a legend that would outlast the papyrus scrolls. Even the palace guards hums along, proving that good stories travel faster than any royal decree. Together, these three women carved more than stone. They etched identity into the very air Egypt breathed. The queen's iron will forged policies as sturdy as basalt. The priestess's devotion built sanctuaries that resonated like cathedrals on a cosmic podcast, and Amara's verses stitched daily life into a tapestry vibrant enough to blind a sun god. Their efforts mingled, like sand and river water, creating monuments both visible and invisible, from towering obelisks to the lingering echo of a lullaby in a mother's cradle. Irony laughs in the background. While empires rise and fall, it's often the behind-the-scenes heroines who keep the cultural engine humming. Their legacy proves that leadership, faith, and perseverance are the true architects of history, not just the men with chisels. As night fell over the desert, the stars flickered like ancient emojis, each one a reminder of stories written in both hieroglyphs and heartbeats. The wind carried whispers of the queen's decree, the priestess's hymn, and Amara's chorus, mingling into a nocturnal symphony that made the papyrus reeds sway. Travelers passing through would pause, inhaling the sweet aroma of lotus blossoms mixed with the earthy scent of mud, feeling the weight of centuries in a single breath. They left footprints in the sand, and those prints, like tiny time capsules, will one day become the stuff of future ballads. In the end, the true monument stands not in granite, but in the collective memory that sings, prays, and rules, forever echoing the legacy in stone and song. The hot sun hammered the limestone streets of Thebes, turning the city into a sprawling desert market. Vendors hawked figs and papyrus, their shouts blending with the clatter of donkey carts and the faint hum of a distant temple choir. In the shadow of the great sanctuary, young Nefri slipped into the cramped scriptorium, eyes wide as the cobra motifs painted on the walls. Master Scribe Amos, a wiry man with ink-stained fingertips, greeted him with a grin that said, "Welcome to the world where pictures talk louder than speech bubbles." The apprentice felt a mix of awe and nerves, as if he just stepped onto a movie set where every prop could rewrite history. Amos thrust a reed pen into Nefri's shaking hand, showing him how to carve a simple reed leaf symbol that meant life. "Think of it as an ancient emoji," the master joked. "Except the emojis can summon a divine curse if you misuse them." The apprentice practiced tracing the curvy hieroglyph of a loaf of bread, the charcoal scent curling around his nose like burnt popcorn. Each stroke sang a quiet crackle, and the fresh ink smelled of river mud mixed with the sweet perfume of lotus blossoms. By the end of the day, Nefri could write his name, Nfri, though it looked more like a cryptic street art tag than a royal decree. Meanwhile, the kingdom buzzed with preparations for the king's pilgrimage to the hidden temple of Osiris, a journey whispered about in taverns as the great hide and seek. Musicians tuned bronze drums, their beats echoing off the city walls like a giant heart thumping under a hot sandbag. Amos revealed that a secret message would be etched into the temple's inner wall, a puzzle designed to be uncovered only by those who could read the language of the gods. The scribe's eyes twinkled. "We'll hide a clue as sly as a cat in a pyramid. Only the cleverest apprentice will find it." Nefri imagined the wall shimmering with hidden words, feeling both excited and terrified, like a kid discovering a cheat code in an old video game. Training took a turn for the messy when Nefri's ink pot tipped, splattering dark, viscous liquid across the polished floor and onto his own sandals. The smell of wet reed and stale fish sauce rose, making his stomach churn like the Nile after a storm. "Congratulations, you just invented hieroglyphic graffiti," Amos chuckled, flicking a handful of sand at the puddle, which sputtered like a tiny fireworks show. Undeterred, Nefri scraped the excess ink with a chisel, the sound crunching like ancient bones under a foot, gross, yet oddly satisfying. He swore to master the brush without turning the scriptorium into a culinary disaster, promising himself to keep his future messages cleaner than a royal bath. As the pilgrimage day loomed, Nefri stood before the unfinished wall, the stone cool under his palm, feeling the weight of countless generations press upon him. Amos whispered, "Remember, the secret isn't just in the symbols. It's in the spaces between, like the quiet pause before a punchline." The apprentice traced a faint line, half smiling at the thought that his name might one day flicker across history like a Netflix intro. He tightened his grip on the reed pen, ready to carve a message that would hide a truth as sly as a fox in a pyramid disguise. With a final breath of lotus perfume, Nefri stepped back, confident that his work would echo through the ages, the ultimate Easter egg for any future scribe who dared to look. Nefri's fingertips brushed the brittle fibers of the papyrus, and a stray glyph leapt out like a mischievous cat from a tumbleweed. The ink, dark as midnight in the desert, curled into a shape no scribe had ever taught, half a ibis, half a coffee cup, as if the gods were ordering a latte. He squinted under the flickering torchlight, the smell of old flax and dust tickling his nose, and felt a shiver of both dread and excitement. "Looks like the ancient Egyptians left us a spoiler alert," he muttered, half laughing, half praying that the priests wouldn't think he was joking. The glyph pulsed with a promise, a concealed prophecy hidden in plain sight. Outside the library, the city hummed with the clang of armor and the hiss of whispered conspiracies. Political tensions rose faster than a pharaoh's pyramid scheme. Rival priesthoods, each wearing robes brighter than a Vegas neon sign, plotted to claim the secret for their own gods, their incense clouding the air with sweet, oppressive perfume. Nefri could hear the distant drums of marching soldiers, their boots thudding like a low rider bass line. Amos, his loyal friend with a scar shaped like a lightning bolt, nudged him, eyes twinkling with the irony of being caught between divine drama and bureaucratic drama. "We're about to become the backstage crew for a very ancient reality show," Amos whispered, half grinning. The duo slipped through the winding alleys, where sand clung to their sandals like stubborn lint, and the wind sang a gritty lullaby of dry bones. Bandits clad in mismatched armor that looked like they'd raided a costume shop blocked their path, their laughter grating against the night like a squeaky hinge. The smell of goat cheese and stale ale wafted from a nearby tavern, making Nefri's stomach growl louder than a Nile crocodile. With a swift spin and a well-timed kick, Amos sent a bandit's hat flying off, revealing a hidden scar shaped like a hieroglyph, proof that even thieves loved the drama. They chased the thieves into a dunescape where the sand hissed under their boots, each grain a tiny, abrasive whisper reminding them of the stolen codex they must retrieve. At the edge of a crumbling oasis, the thieves had hidden the codex inside a marble sarcophagus that smelled of ancient rot and cactus juice, a scent as delightful as a desert dumpster fire. Nefri lunged, his hand brushing against the cool stone, feeling the subtle tremor of a hidden mechanism, like a secret level in an old video game. With a grunt, he pulled the lid open, exposing pages that crackled like dry parchment firecrackers, each line shimmering with the same illicit glyph they'd found earlier. The bandits, now panicked, tried to flee, but almost blocked the exit, twirling his staff like a rock star's microphone stand. As the thieves were cuffed and hauled away, Nefri cracked a joke about pirates of the Nile, earning a rare, genuine chuckle from the grim priestess overseeing the scene. Back in the sanctum, the codex was laid upon an altar scented with frankincense, and the sweet, metallic tang of spilled blood from an earlier sacrifice, an aroma that made Nefri's throat feel like sandpaper. As they deciphered the hidden message, the glyphs aligned to spell a prophecy. When shadows dance upon the dunes, a new ruler shall rise from the sand, bearing the mark of the laughing ibis. The revelation hit like a sudden sandstorm, blowing dust into everyone's eyes, yet somehow feeling oddly refreshing. Ngamos nudged Nefri, smirking. Looks like you just unlocked the ultimate Easter egg of ancient Egypt. The chapter closed with the two friends standing under a star-spangled sky, the desert's cool breath whispering that even in the harshest sands, secrets, like good jokes, always find a way to surface. The night air in Thebes smelled of roasted figs, and the faint tang of Nile mud as Lena and Sam huddled over the cracked papyrus codex. Their lantern flickered, casting jittery shadows that danced like nervous hieroglyphs on the stone walls. Lena traced a faded vulture with a fingertip, while Sam muttered about ancient emojis before the candle sputtered out. Suddenly, a stray wind slid a slab of sandstone aside, revealing a hidden compartment humming with the promise of secrets. They exchanged a glance that said, "We're about to become the Netflix binge of archaeology." Flipping through the codex, they spotted a bewildering cipher where animal symbols pirouetted beside celestial icons, like a cosmic horoscope for the gods. An ibis stared up at a full moon, a scarab scuttled past a sunrise, and a lion prowled a cluster of Orion's stars, each pairing hinting at a date on the ancient calendar. With the gusto of a detective in a courtroom drama, Sam matched the symbols to recorded eclipses, while Lena whispered, if the gods were into astrology, they definitely had a wild side. Their laughter echoed off the stone as the cipher cracked, spilling out a shimmering map drawn in ochre ink. The map, smelling faintly of incense and ancient sweat, pointed straight to a section of the Temple of Karnak no modern tourist guide would dare mention. Guided by the map, they slipped through a narrow shaft behind a colossal statue of Amun, the air turning thick with the sour stench of centuries-old decay. Their boots slapped against slick limestone, and the sound resonated like a distant drumbeat in a tomb party. When they finally pushed open a hidden door, a cavernous burial chamber yawned before them, littered with glittering gold leaf, broken pottery, and the lingering perfume of myrrh that made their throats tighten. The walls were etched with scenes of pharaohs feasting with jackal-headed deities, illuminated by shafts of moonlight that turned the dust into a glittering snow globe. Lena whispered, "It's like finding the Easter egg in the greatest video game ever made, only the boss fight is a mummy," and they both shivered with excitement and a whiff of ancient rot. Just as they began cataloging the trove, a shadow slithered across the entrance, Vizier Zephyros, his robes billowing like a drama queen's cape, eyes glinting with bureaucratic fury. He barked orders in a voice that sounded like a scribe who had skipped lunch, demanding the duo hand over their findings and promising a fate worse than a sandstorm in a sundial shop. Sam, never one to back down, tossed a half-broken amulet at Zephyros, shouting, "You can't censor the past, bro. This isn't a spoiler alert, it's the full season finale." The vizier's henchmen lunged, their sandals squeaking on the slick floor, while Lena slipped a rope around a stone pillar, ready to make a dramatic escape. The irony was palpable. The man who guarded secrets for centuries now resembled a reality TV judge trying to silence a contestant's reveal. With a swift tug, Lena yanked the rope, sending a cascade of sand and dust down on Zephyros, who coughed like a dragon with a bad cold. The duo darted out of the chamber, clutching a jeweled scarab that glowed like a tiny galaxy, its surface pulsing with an eerie blue light. Outside, the temple's courtyard buzzed with cicadas, their chirps sounding suspiciously like a vintage sitcom laugh track. As they vanished into the night, the ancient gods seemed to smile, their hieroglyphic eyes winking at the audacity of two modern explorers who turned a dusty cipher into a blockbuster adventure. And somewhere in the distance, a modern tourist muttered, "Did someone just pull an Indiana Jones move?" Nefri slipped through the yawning mouth of the sealed chamber like a cat burglar on a museum heist, his torch flickering against walls that had not seen daylight in a millennium. A stale perfume of aged incense and the sour bite of damp limestone assaulted his nose, making him cough like a dragon with a cold. The air hummed with a low, rattling sigh as ancient stone doors slammed shut behind him, sealing him in with the weight of untold centuries. He felt the gritty sand of forgotten tombs crunch under his boots, each step echoing like a drumbeat in a silent theater. With a half grin, he whispered, "I hope this place has Wi-Fi, because I've got a lot of scrolling to do," and pressed on. The floor suddenly sprang a series of pressure plates, launching poison darts that hissed through the air like angry wasps. Nefri dove behind a crumbling column, the metal tips whistling past his ear while his heart thumped louder than a hip-hop bass drop. As he scrambled to his feet, the walls ahead burst into a cascade of luminous hieroglyphs, each symbol glowing amber as if lit by 1,000 fireflies. The glyphs danced in perfect rhythm, spelling out a warning that glittered like a neon billboard. A flood would rise and swallow the Nile unless the ancient safeguard was triggered. He ran a finger over the glowing script, feeling the faint, warm pulse of centuries-old magic vibrate against his skin. The message unfurled in a cinematic flash, revealing a scene of the river Nile swelling like a colossal, angry cat, its waters lapping at the city walls and drowning the fields of golden wheat. A jagged line of hieroglyphic water, droplets warned of a deluge that would drown not only ships, but also the very scrolls of knowledge hidden in the desert dunes. The scent of wet mud and river silt seemed to seep from the stone, making Nefri's nose wrinkle as if he'd just stepped into a swamp after a rainy season. A sudden shiver ran down his spine, part fear, part excitement, like the first time you realize the video game boss is actually a real thing. He muttered, "Great, just when I thought I'd have a quiet night," and pressed deeper into the chamber's shadowy recesses. Just as Nefri deciphered the last line, the thunderous clang of the vizier's soldiers rattled the temple's pillars, their torches spilling orange light like a rogue rave in a tomb. The sound of marching boots and clanking armor reverberated through the stone, mixing with the distant roar of the looming flood, as if the gods themselves had turned up the volume. Nefri could see silhouettes of spears and shields slipping through the cracks, the iron glinting menacingly against the ancient carvings. He smirked, thinking of how history books will now have a footnote that says, "And then the vizier's dudes crashed the party," while his own pulse raced faster than a chariot on a racing track. With no time to waste, he bolted toward the central alcove, where the ancient mechanism lay dormant. The mechanism resembled a massive stone puzzle, its gears and levers covered in centuries-old dust and the occasional beetle droppings, giving it an aroma of ancient cheese. Nefri shoved his palm onto the central stone, feeling the gritty grit crunch as the hidden compartments clicked open with the satisfaction of a perfectly timed punchline. He pulled the heavy lever, and a deep, resonant rumble rolled through the chamber, shaking the very foundations of the temple like a bass drop in a heavy metal concert. Water began to surge inward, but the ancient device sprang to life, diverting the flood's wrath into secret channels that spitted it back into the desert sands. As the vizier's forces stormed the doorway, Nefri stood tall, his torch flickering triumphantly, and declared, "You can't spell secret without a little bit of pressure," sealing the chamber and the mystery forever. The golden hall throbbed with the scent of burnt frankincense and river mud, as Nefri slipped the reed-wrapped scroll into the pharaoh's palm. He had spent sleepless nights coaxing meaning from a jagged line of hieroglyphs that looked like a cat doing yoga. When the sun pierced the alabaster windows, the hidden prophecy glowed like a neon billboard in the desert. Nefri cleared his throat, feeling the weight of 1,000 sand-scoured eyes on his shoulders. The audience, a sea of linen-clad nobles, lined in, waiting for the inked stars to speak. The pharaoh stared, his crown swiveling like a DJ's headphones, and let out a chuckle that echoed off the basalt columns. He read the omen of floods and smiled, realizing his ancestors had been more forward-thinking than a Netflix series about climate change. "So we'll build canals, not just for the dead," he declared, his voice rumbling like a distant thunderstorm over the Nile. The courtiers gasped, half from awe, half from the sudden whiff of wet silt that seemed to drift in with the words. Ironically, the prophecy promised a deluge that would wash away the bureaucracy, leaving only fresh water and fresh gossip. With the prophecy secured, Nefri was elevated to master scribe, a title that felt as heavy as a stone tablet but shone brighter than a smartphone screen. He spent his days carving symbols into fresh papyrus, the crinkling sound like popcorn popping in a desert oven. Apprentices gathered, their eyes wide, while the scent of ink sharp like a horse's sweat filled the workshop. Nefri taught them to listen to the silence between the lines, where the gods whispered jokes about mortals' love affairs. Even the stern palace cat, Bastet, lounged nearby, swatting at stray reeds as if auditioning for a role in a feline version of Mission Impossible. Knowledge spread faster than a rumor about a new pyramid, winding its way through mud-brick streets and bustling markets. Young scribes practiced decoding messages hidden in everything from bread stamps to lovers' graffiti on temple walls. The air hummed with the rhythmic tap of styluses, a concerto of clicks that could rival any rock concert in intensity. Occasionally, a novice would slip, carving a hieroglyph that resembled a pizza slice, prompting roars of laughter that bounced off the limestone. Yet each corrected line added a stitch to the tapestry of Egyptian resilience, weaving flood control plans into the very fabric of daily life. As twilight draped the city in violet ribbons, Nefri stood beneath the star-spattered sky, feeling the weight of inked constellations on his back. He imagined future generations reading his marginal notes, perhaps while sipping a date-sweetened latte, if such a thing ever existed. The legacy of the inked stars glimmered like a retro video game's high-score screen, reminding everyone that even gods love a good cheat code. With a final sigh that smelled like wet papyrus and river reeds, Nefri whispered, "May the floods be friendly and the paperwork brief." And the night hummed, the Nile sighing softly, as his story was etched into eternity.